So last night, my friend came over and spent the night. I go to bed pretty early. I would say a good 2 to 3 hours before everyone else. And so I'm usually the first up in my house of 7 people. And I always go to bed watching Family Guy. But when I woke up, it was playing something else. And as I went up to change it, I heard my friend's voice from the other room say my name. Now, I know there were 3 problems. One, I just saw my friend laying down sleeping on the couch to my left. If he did wake up and called my name, he would have sounded tired as if he just woke up. But this sounded like his normal voice and was practically emotionless. 2, he rarely calls me by my actual name. And 3, the voice sounded like it was coming way too far to be the guy right behind me. And luckily, I'm already a big fucking pussy when it comes to paranormal shit. And my sister's stories of demonic encounters in a dream didn't help. So I just looked down at the floor and walked back to the couch I was sleeping on and covered myself with my blanket for a good 10 to 15 minutes. During which, I think I heard something moving me behind me, and my exposed legs didn't feel like they were being touched, but kind of surrounded by something, if that makes any sense. She told me this story when I was younger and back in my hometown of Zacatecas, Mexico. Anyways, let's get started with the story. This story takes place around 25 years ago. During the night, my mom likes to take simple walks around to clear her head after a day's hard work. Because it's always hot and humid during the day, she uses this time to savor the cool breeze of the silent yet peaceful night. Without a doubt, my mom thinks it's going to be a regular stroll like always, but then she hears it. Near a small lake that is a little farther away from the town, there's this girl in a white dress, walking, but crying. As she's crying, she hears the phrase, mis hijos. My mom knew that this was Llorona, because every single person in Latin America knows of this woman. For those who don't know about La Llorona, there used to be a beautiful but poor girl who had fallen in love with a rich man. Both individuals felt the same amount of love and compassion for each other. They surely got married and had kids. They truly loved each other, or so she thought. The woman found out that her husband was having an affair from the constant disappearances in the middle of the night, catching them in the act. One dark night, she took the children out for an evening stroll before stopping near a lake. Because her children looked so much like their father, she threw them in the water and let them drown. Realizing what she had done, the woman felt an immense regret and sadness swell up upon her soul, thus throwing herself into drown in the water with her kids. Because of her sins, she is to forever walk the earth in search of her kids, even though they have already passed to the other side. Her appearance is quite noticeable. She's always wearing a torn white dress while her eyes are crying blood. There are many variations of how she looks, but this is how my mom described it to me. My mom sees this woman crying near the lake. Whenever you see something that you didn't know existed, you can't help but stare at it. La Llorona felt as if someone was staring at us, so she turned around to make eye contact with my mom. Before I continue, when my mom told me this next part, she began to pray because this event scared the living hell out of her, asking for Jesus and the Guadalupe to give her strength. After praying, she continued with the story. My mom stared clearly into the eyes of this woman to see the torn dress, the pale face, the black bags under her eyes, and the blood leaking down her eyes. My mom made eye contact with this woman for about a minute before it began to move towards her. My mom turns around and runs, full-on sprint. When she arrived home, she got on her knees and prayed to the Guadalupe statue all night. When we came to America, she refused to let me go outside. Not even 5 minutes, because she feels that Llorona will get me. I believe her, because I constantly feel like something is watching me whenever I'm walking back home during the dark. So this story starts a while ago, when I was 5. So just to give you an idea, You would open my door, and on the right is my dresser. And then in the far right is my bunk bed and a window. And then on the left is my TV and closet. So I slept in my bunk every night. However, I would wake up every night to see a body part or dead body in my bed. Also, my dad has a very strong haunting on this side of the family. My parents and I kind of wrote it off as just little kids' nightmares, since my mom doesn't really believe in spirits. Fast forward till I was 7, and I was still having these nightmares. And I started having nightmares about a girl in the corner of my room. She was beautiful, just like absolutely beautiful, and she had long black hair, and she wore a pretty white flowery dress. I started seeing her in real life, but only like little glimpses in the corner of my eye. It was really creepy, and as you might guess, I was old enough to understand that that wasn't a real person in my bedroom. So I started to see her get worse and worse looking every night, and she would start walking over to my bed, but I could only see her head since I was on the top bunk. She would lay beneath me in the bottom bunk until I fell asleep. I got brave one night and decided to ask her what her name was and why she was here. She said her name was Elizabeth, and she refused to answer my second question. She stopped coming after a while and then just stopped coming at all. Fast forward again to when I was 9, and I started having really bad sleep paralysis every single night. It eventually went away, and now I get it every few weeks. Anyways, when I was 11, we moved to Virginia. As soon as I got here, I decided to explore around, so I did. I saw a river and a pond and some other stuff, but then I saw a small forest that was a small area of loads of trees. I walked into the trees, and I found some graves which creeped me out, since they were obviously abandoned. I was reading along all of the names and found one called Elizabeth. That's when I turned and bolted back home. After that, I would wake up to her in my room again, and she looked so awful this time. She was burned and her hair was frizzy and burned. She basically looked like she was just in a fire. I started waking up a few minutes earlier than when Elizabeth came, and another girl with blonde hair and a flowy light yellow dress would sit on my bed and tell Elizabeth to leave once she came, and Elizabeth would scream and leave. I was only 11, so this scared me so badly. I could cry, and the girl told me her name was Lillian. Anyways, Elizabeth eventually left, and I started having more dreams about a little girl pulling me out of bed. After that, I got super into spiritual things and saged my room and stuff. These dreams ended, and I found out a few weeks later the people who were buried there died from a fire. I still see her in public or crowded places sometimes, but for now, she's gone. I'm not sure what happened with Lillian, but I haven't seen her since. However, I feel her presence. When I was younger, my family lived in a run-down, terribly built and dangerous neighborhood. It was the type of neighborhood where hearing gunshots was quite frequent. I figured this information might be useful to determine the type of energy or figures we dealt with. We had multiple paranormal experiences at the old house, and that's one of the reasons I'm so glad we moved out. One of the experiences I remember most happened before school one morning. At that point in time, I lived with 4 of my current 5 siblings and both of my parents. But that morning, it had only been my eldest brother, a middle schooler, and I, an elementary student. He and I sit at our kitchen table, which was near the wall and had a clear shot of our small kitchen and the back door, while everyone else got ready for the day upstairs. We had been quietly eating cereal together when suddenly, the back door flew open and shut, and a blurry black figure rushed into our house. It was so fast that it seemed to disappear the moment it arrived. My brother and I had both seen it. I know he saw it as well, because the moment it happened, we both shared a scared look and promptly stood up. He and I checked our back door and found that it had been locked. There was no way anything could have come in because it had been locked, so we were both terrified. We went back to eating, but were shaken up by our experience. I remember being so scared as I finished my bowl of cereal. This is a small story, but it seems relevant. My brother told me one day, a long while later, that he remembered waking up in the middle of the night, only to see a disturbing face looking back at him. His bed was positioned with the foot of the bed facing the hallway, and I have no idea why he slept with his door open, but whatever. When he opened his eyes, he saw a tall black figure with no distinguishable features, except its glowing red eyes staring back at him. And of course, he remained still and silent, trying not to show any signs of movement or acknowledgement. Eventually, he managed to fall back asleep and never saw the figure again. I remember seeing shadows move in that home when everyone else was doing their own thing. The creatures never did anything that I was aware of, but they scared the hell out of me and my brother. My mom says she had some paranormal experiences there too, but I don't remember them. I'll ask her tomorrow. Thankfully, they didn't seem to follow any of us to the new house, which we lived in for 5 years now. The only experience I've had at this house was a chance encounter with a sleep paralysis demon and hearing inexplicable breathing in my own room sometimes, but those weren't enough to shake me up. Has anyone heard the voice of their pets? My friend told me about a year ago that she heard one of her cats speak to her. Her cat said, "Move." Though she says it freaked her out, she rolled over and the cat jumped onto the bed and got comfortable. She said it was a very small, feminine voice. Not gonna lie, I loved hearing about this because I love hearing about unexplainable things. But then it happened to me. Last night, I was laying in bed trying to sleep. I was tired, but not sleeping. It had been probably an hour when I rolled over and became vaguely aware that my cat was walking around to my side of the bed. This is typical, as he likes to sleep with me. He didn't jump up, he just sat there, and I swear I could feel him staring at me. Again, not totally out of the ordinary, but I noticed it. Then I heard, "Up, I'm hungry," in the most chilling, high-pitched, non-human voice. Very clear and direct in my head. It had me so shaken, I asked my husband if he had heard it. No, I didn't get up to feed him again. Aside from being completely freaked out and frozen in bed, he had both a bowl of dry food and an extra treat of wet food for dinner. I knew he was good, at least for the night. This has now happened to my friend twice and now myself. Am I going crazy? Did I really hear him? Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? From age 8 to 14, I lived in a one-story house with a basement and garage with my parents and grandparents. Funnily enough, the basement was the least scary and weird part of the house. From the basement at night, you could hear footsteps constantly and the floorboard above creaking. There were weird incidents in the basement, but they happened far less often. Whenever we moved to the back room to sleep, instead of the basement, things only got weirder. It started with me seeing a woman covered in bandages sleeping next to my mother. I asked who she was, and my mother just dismissed me entirely, so I ignored it and fell asleep. Later, I saw a white orb bouncing sporadically in the bathroom closet. Once again, I told my mother, but she chalked it up to a firefly. Fireflies don't glow like that or move that fast. I heard a song playing, but no matter how hard I listened, I couldn't make out the lyrics. When I asked my mother if she heard that music, she said no. It played for hours before I eventually fell asleep, and it sounded so clear, so why couldn't I understand the words? The scariest was when I was laying in bed one day and I saw my sister walking down the hall while I was upside down on the bed. I called to her, but she didn't respond, so I turned around to put myself upright, just as she stepped through the doorway. When I looked back, she wasn't there, and I realized the thing I thought was my sister didn't have a face. My grandfather also had weird experiences, like shadowy figures walking around his bedroom. I once saw one in ours digging through things. Footsteps would echo through the halls at all hours of the night, despite everyone being asleep. The house creeped us all out, and all of us had weird feelings inside the house. We moved out a while after a tornado almost hit us. I haven't been back since, but sometimes think about what I experienced there. The fan inside my cooker hood, which I've never used before, has activated twice. The first time it deactivated as soon as I entered the kitchen to check where the noise was coming from, and I did nothing else. The second time, a few minutes afterwards, it kept going until I switched the wrong lever, which is the one that turns on the cooker's hood lights. I noticed and turned off the correct lever, the one that turns the fan on or off. It should be noted that these levers take quite a bit of strength to be moved, but the creepier thing is that both times the fan deactivated for weird reasons. After this occurrence, I noticed that my cat was under my bed, which is something he only does when he's scared. After a while, he got out and very carefully walked towards the kitchen. He stood on the threshold and looked inside at a specific spot on the wall, not at the cooking hood itself, even standing on his hind legs. Needless to say, I could see nothing there. My cat was unusually tense and frightened, but he seems to be over it now. It had been a long spring cleaning my room. I wasn't done, so all the things I had under my bed were piled up in the corner of my room. I washed my face and brushed my teeth, as that's my usual night routine, and then I went to bed. I was really tired and was looking forward to getting some sleep. While laying in bed, I could feel the presence of someone in the room. I ignored it because it happens all the time. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, and suddenly I could feel someone slowly laying down beside me. I froze, and then I felt a hand brushing against my leg. Scared to my bones, I jumped up and turned on the light, and guess what? No one was there. Still scared and in shock, I sat down on the bed with my feet on the floor. And just when I finally calmed down, someone grabbed my leg from under the bed and tried to pull me down under. I quickly pulled up my legs and crawled to the corner of my bed. Tears started to fall down my cheeks, and I took my phone and texted my brother and mother. I cried until my brother came into my room, and I just knew one thing. I did not want to sleep in my room that night. And from now on, I always have a bunch of boxes and other stuff under my bed. When I was little, I played with a little girl named Christina. We did everything together, and she was my best friend. She even came with us when we went to another country. We played on the swing and pushed each other, and one time, she made me cut my own hair. It wasn't just a little bit of hair that I cut off, it was almost everything, and I got in so much trouble. I also remember that one time she had the most horrific pants. They were bright orange Manchester pants, but one of the time she wore a dress. She had long wavy hair and always wore it in a half-up hairstyle. My family thought I was crazy playing with her, and I didn't understand why until years later. Then, we stopped hanging out when I was about 10 or 11 years old. Then years later, my mom saw her. My mom came out from the bathroom, and there she was, right outside the door. As soon as she saw her, she disappeared. My mom rushed to my room to tell me what she had seen and started to describe her. My reaction was, I've played with a ghost. That's why they thought I was crazy. They didn't see her. I was the only one who saw her then, until my nephew was about 5. He has seen her multiple times, but he starts to talk about other things and avoids talking about what he's seen. He isn't the only one who's seen her nowadays. We've gotten so used to her that we don't mind her being there. The medium told us that she isn't stuck here, she just likes to visit. My 5-year-old son, who happens to be high-functioning autistic, has had several things happen over the years. Recently, they seem to be becoming more frequent. The first time we noticed something was when he was about 9 months old. We took a road trip and stopped off in Fall River, Massachusetts, to tour the Lizzie Borden house. While there with the tour group, my husband was holding our son, and we were the last ones to leave the parlor area. My son was looking over my husband's shoulder back into the empty room and started laughing, clapping, and waving at the empty room. He was clearly seeing something that we couldn't. Recently, he's been telling us he sees Jesus, and when asked what Jesus looks like, he says Jesus is a bright light. He says Jesus doesn't talk to him, but he's there. That has happened in a couple of different places. One day, out of the blue, he tells my husband and me he's hungry. We ask him who, and he says Jeremy. His brother's name is Jeremy. In college, the boys are 15 years apart, and we say Baba? He says no, Jeremy from Daddy's office. We're like, okay. Then less than 3 minutes later, my husband and I get a text on our group text with Jeremy from my husband's office. And it's a picture of his dinner that he'd just finished grilling. It was steak and veggies. The other night, my husband and son went to Sonic and got some grape slushies and chicken. I asked my son what he got, and he said chicken and tots. I was thinking about how good the DQ chicken salads used to be back in the day, but never said anything out loud, and all of a sudden my son says, maybe next time we can go to DQ. We've never taken him to DQ, ever. I asked my husband if I said anything about DQ, and he said no, you didn't. These just seem too coincidental to be coincidental. What do you think? At the start of the pandemic, I decided to get back into retro gaming. I wanted to catch up on my backlog and try to get some gems from the past. I posted about it on Reddit, and I got a few suggestions on what to check out. Using an emulator, I could pretty much play anything. This one guy suggested I play Hatchetman Cove. I'd never heard of it, and I couldn't find it anywhere. There was an inactive Steam page for it, but there was no available download. Instead, I opted for another game by the same developer called Changelings. I don't think a lot of people have heard of this game. It's a game from the PS2, but I don't know if it was ever physically published. I found it for the emulator though. Changelings actually had a pretty clever concept. It was sort of a reverse game show. You're put in a position where your made-up friend, lover or parent has been cloned. Every round, you are faced with 4 identical copies of a person, and your task is to find the real one. You have to ask them questions to figure it out. You're asked several personal questions to calibrate what sort of answers you're supposed to look for. You can add as much data to your profile as you want. They have like 500 questions. Based on the number of questions you answer, you get a psychological profile. You can check it out on the main menu. The more data you provide, the deeper and more personal questions you can ask the clones. If you answer just a few, you can't really ask the clones that much, and it gets a lot harder. The first night I booted up Changelings was a lot of fun. Filling out your profile unlocked more and more cosmetics, so I made it a point to answer all of them. It took almost an entire night, but after that, the answers generated seemed eerily human. The game had a bit of an uncomfortable atmosphere. The colours were toned down, and the characteristics had this robotic, auto-generated text-to-speech thing going on. It all took place in this sort of funhouse laboratory setting, with strange mirrors and sterile walls. The main menu was a lab that you had to walk around in to get to options, start games, credits and all that. Also, there were tank controls. Once I started playing the game, it became apparent that this wasn't just any old game. You could ask the clones weirdly deep questions, and they would answer as best as they could based on your profile. This meant that as much as you were playing against them, you were also playing against yourself. The better you knew your own profile, the easier it was to eliminate the clones. The clone, being a close friend, relative or lover, would know you better than a clone. So just seeing who knows you the best in certain ways is the way to go. For example, I asked the clones what my favourite type of sandwich was. I got 4 different answers. Your favourite is tuna and oregano. Your favourite is tuna and ham. Your favourite is tuna and mayonnaise. Your favourite is tuna and bell peppers. All answers were tuna, which is what I'd answered on my profile. But the second word, that wasn't part of it. But that's the tricky thing about this game. Based on your profile, it makes an estimate about what could be your favourite. So thinking about it, I figured a mayonnaise tuna sandwich would be the correct answer, as it sounded the most true to me and my taste. Nothing was completely wrong, but that was the most right. Still, it was a bit of a gamble. Yeah, I won that round. Tuna and mayonnaise was spot on. The game figured this out just by the sheer number of answers I'd provided. It knew my palate. I've since started making them regularly. It's like the game knew me better than myself. And that's the game. I got really into it. One thing about these older unknown titles is that you actually have to consider a lot of it for yourself. There are no shortcuts or guides. I tried getting the best score, the most elaborate answers, making up the funniest questions, all kinds of stuff. But if the questions were too nonsensical, the game would just recognize them. You could use preset questions and just put in certain words like, what is my favorite X? What do you think of X? What was the name of my first X? That was the best way to get a good answer. You can make a completely custom prompt though, but you might get an error. Also, it was clunky as hell, as you couldn't use a keyboard or click the letters. You had to move with direction arrows and choose the letters one by one. The game doesn't just let you pick out the character you think is the real one. You must kill off the clones in elimination rounds. It wasn't graphic or anything. They'd just be taken to another room or you'd hear a scream. At the end of the round, with just one person remaining, your character steps into that room. If you get it right, they'll hug you, kiss you, or thank you. If you get it wrong, the character got this strange grinning expression on their face, and the screen would cut to black. Then, your character would be the one who screams. By day 5, I'd discovered a glitch. You could bug out the game by putting a question within a question. If you did, the clones sort of spazzed out, and you got a full score as you'd won the round. This score could be used to unlock cosmetics and new sets. It kind of messed with my score though. See, the game never really stops working on your profile. Whenever you ask a question, it analyzes it. If it recognizes what you're asking, it uses that information in establishing your profile. If you ask a lot of questions about your past, it might take that into account. Same with questions about work, relationships, the future, and other themes. The game really feels like it tries to get to know you. But with corrupted scores, the game started bugging out. For me, the strangest thing was starting a new round and the clones were just gone. Just an empty room with no one there to answer my questions. Other times, all clones would just stand there with a big grin on their face, all saying the same answer. At one point, a clone backed out of the kill room and just got back in their seat without a head. Despite all this, I reluctantly got into it. It was strange to reverse answer questions about myself. I felt like I was teaching the game who I was. Hell, I didn't even mind the bugged out stats. In some cases, it just added to the atmosphere. I took short breaks every now and then, but came back to try out a new strategy, or to see if I could get a new unlock. I also got into the lore of the game, trying to find secrets hidden in the main menu room. There were a few folders and videos. Folders told the story of a pharmaceutical company who were trying to perfect an algorithm for spotting imposters. A series of in-game cutscenes told the story of a team who'd unleashed something horrible and were looking for a way to circumvent an upcoming disaster by building a protocol. The game took place in the 70s, so it got some of that analog horror vibe going. 2 weeks into playing it, I unlocked a character called the Boss, who was the final archetype of changeling. Boss was by far the toughest one. She did the thing where all the clones had identical outfits, and they'd sometimes switch places if you weren't paying attention. Beating her was an absolute pain. It wasn't just about having a 1 in 4 chance of guessing right. She would sometimes actively make herself suspicious and then switch places with the original. It was, by all means, the equivalent of a boss battle. I I tried using the glitch, but it just didn't work on her. All it did was throw me back to the main screen. I had to power through, grab my notebook, and actually make an effort. She was just odd. When you brought her clones into the kill room, there was no scream. It just got quiet and the lights flickered a bit. But Boss didn't thank you when you saved her. Instead, the lights just start to flicker and you're thrown back to the main menu. When I beat her, I got the final unlock, a character called Blameless. While other archetypes had icons of people when you started a new game, Blameless just had some sort of blue-tinted sunflower icon. The tooltip said debug, while other tooltips had at least hinted at a viable strategy. As soon as I started it up, I figured something was wrong. The loading time was several minutes long, and once it loaded up, the game camera was stuck in another room. It took me a few minutes before I realized that the camera had switched to first person, and that I was actually in the interrogation room. To my sides were clones of my avatar, looking at me with those distorted pixel faces. On the other side of a window, I could see the white hair and dress of Blameless, motionless. It was all switched up. The game started asking questions for me to answer, forcing me to defend myself. I figured if I was honest and revealing, the game could figure out I was the real one. So I got into it. I did my best. But the questions were getting out of hand. Some of them were way too personal, and others were just too strange. Asking things about my sex life, my religion, my childhood trauma, my fantasies. At one point, I got asked the same question 4 times in a row. Would you kill for your god? At some point, I just felt uncomfortable playing. The clones in the room were just staring at me with those creepy smiles. It was the middle of the night, and I'd been playing for hours. I decided enough was enough, and stepped away to get a drink. I was standing in the kitchen, Coke in hand, when I heard it from the other room. I said, would you kill for your god? I nearly choked on my soda. The game was paused. I had no idea how to beat Blameless. I'd lose over and over again, and I'd see my character taken into the kill room. The screen would just go black, and then I'd be back at the main menu. I tried adapting to her tactics and listening for clues, but she was so unpredictable. The clones would copy part of what I answered and switch a few words up. Blameless would get it wrong over and over and over. Was she bad at the game, or did she just want to kill me? Maybe for her, the game was killing the real one instead of saving them. If so, they were really good at it. Or was my character a clone all along? At one point, I just stopped playing. I wasn't invested enough to get this frustrated. I'd gotten all I could out of changelings, so it was time to move on. However, as I started looking for the next game to play, my phone dinged. Text message. Game over. I turned off my phone and backed away from my computer. I just stood there, panting. Unknown number. No way. No fucking way. I uninstalled everything. It had to be a virus. I turned my phone off and fetched my backup flick-up phone. I ran a malware check on my computer, locked all my windows, and closed the curtains. Has someone used the game to spy on me? Like a password phishing thing? It wasn't unheard of, and some of my questions could be used to guess the answer to my secret questions. I got paranoid. I'd stop at random times while showering just to hear if someone was sneaking around my apartment or looking through the mail slot. I thought about calling the police, but seeing as how emulators can be a bit of a grey legal area, I wasn't too sure about it. It'd be too hard to explain. It was midnight when my flip phone rang. Unknown caller. I thought about not answering, throwing it away and just not looking back. But I had to know more. Who was this person and what did they want? What did they really want? So I picked it up. Game over. Same robotic text-to-speech function. Same tone of voice. Then the line went completely silent. No breathing, no moving, just nothing. Just a faint electric buzz. I just stood there, trying to control my breathing. I felt dizzy, as if I'd suddenly run a marathon. What do you want from me? I asked. To find you. Just play without me. We found you. What? You answered. Well. I thought about my words carefully, but my mind was racing. Who was I talking to? Who was behind the voice? And how could they reach me so easily? Game over. Wait, what? What do you... The line went dead, and the phone shut down. Then, my computer shut down. Then the lights, the fridge, hell, the street outside went black. I scrambled for a flashlight when I heard something. Footsteps. Someone was at the door. I couldn't find my goddamn flashlight. I considered my options. I live on the second floor, so a jump might just break my legs. That won't get me anywhere. I didn't have a firearm, but I could get a knife. With my phone dead, I couldn't call the police. I had to do 1,000 things at once, but that wouldn't change that someone was trying to get in. Before I could fetch a single racing thought, the door swung open. For a few seconds, I just held my breath and listened. There were several people, and I was just standing around the corner waiting for something to happen. I felt so goddamn powerless. This was my home, my space. As they got closer, I backed away. When they suddenly stopped, I realized I'd been heard. I had too many options to choose from, but I settled on the balcony. I burst through the balcony door. The air was surprisingly cold, and there was frost on the ground. My heart was beating so fast, and I was hyper-focusing on anything and everything. I could barely see anything from the cloud of my breath, but I could see the two people on the other side of the door. They were me. I thought it was a broken reflection at first. My mind was playing tricks on me. But no, it was me. Different set of clothes, different hair, but two variations of me. One of them was taking something from my computer, but the other had just stared at me with a tilted head. He had made no attempt to open the balcony door. If he did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop him. We just looked at one another. I could see my mannerisms, my quirks, the way they moved, the way they looked at me. I'd seen it in the mirror every day. They were me. I hadn't even noticed I was screaming. The sound just escaped me. I almost fell over the side of the balcony, trying to get away. It was one of my neighbours who saved me. An old woman on the next balcony over, calling out to me, asking if I was okay. Telling me she'd call the police. Telling me to calm down, to talk to her. They're in there, I shrieked. I could barely speak. I pointed right at one of them, and he just tilted his head with a grin. Same creepy grin as in the game. This unrealistic, twisted, ear-to-ear parody of a face. He grabbed the balcony door and slid it ajar, easily. I put one leg over the railing. They weren't getting me. A broken leg or two was a small price to pay. "You're fine," he whispered, in my voice. "We know. You're okay." I could barely hear him over my breathing. I just shook my head. "I'm real," I said. "I'm real, and you're not. You're not." He shook his head and closed the door. We exchanged a look. Seconds later, they were both gone. That was it. I told the police the intruders were masked. I told my neighbour I didn't know who they were. I told them I thought I'd been stalked online, and that I didn't know what was going on. Which is true. I still don't. They haven't bothered me since. The game is just normal. It's like the corrupted file just reset itself. In every way, it just seems like everything has cleared itself up. But I don't think it's that easy. Something has changed since that night. Since playing Changelings. Sometimes when I'm in the bathroom, I get this strange feeling. A mood. And when I look up, I'm grinning. Exactly the way they do. I grew up in a small community in the south of Minnesota called St. Gall. We were 8 families, all loosely related. Uncles and aunts from both sides of my family, along with grandparents and 2 outsider families not directly related by blood. It was a remnant of the hippie era, and my mother grew up out there. It was originally meant to be some sort of farming commune for people who wanted to live on their own terms without going completely off the grid. It isn't like a religious gathering or a cult, as many believe. It was all about a different way of life and living closer to the earth. My mother left St. Gall for a few years to study sociology, and that's where she met my dad. I was an accidental pregnancy, and my dad didn't want to stick around. My mother moved back to St. Gall and had me in the early 90s. I was born in the house I grew up in. Life out in St. Gall wasn't as odd as one might think. I still went to school, I just had to take an earlier bus. We still went into town at least once a week, and I had many friends that I got really close to over the years. Still, there was always that air of being different around me. My mom explained that a lot of the parents of the kids at school didn't like the people from St. Gall because we were different, a bit odd. My mom was terrified of a lot of things, but mostly blood. That was her number one fear. And if I ever hurt myself, she would try to cover it up as fast as possible. It was strange, because I saw kids skin their knees at school all the time without anyone freaking out. I never hurt myself like that, since my mom was adamant about me being needlessly careful. It came to the point where I sometimes had to wear elbow and knee guards to school, which landed me in plenty of trouble from bullies. But my childhood came and went. Elementary school turned into middle school, which turned into high school. Things got rough then, fast. On the best of days, I was a Gaul kid, but most of the time, they just called me Jesus freak, cultist, or even school shooter. I was branded an outsider without there ever really being a reason. I guess that's just what it's like being a teenager. I also refused to take the precautions my mother asked me to. I stopped wearing elbow and knee guards to gym class. Our teacher had a deal where kids could go to the gym instead of playing team sports, but I was tired of being separated. I'd compromised with my mom by wearing several layers of clothes, but I'd usually just wait for her to be out of sight before I took something off. If she ever knew I was pretty good at both soccer and basketball, she'd have a heart attack. It was during those first few PE classes that I started noticing something was different about me. Sure, we were all still growing up, but I was growing a bit different. I was almost completely hairless in comparison to the other boys, and my hair was growing lighter. I'd gone from brown hair to strawberry blonde in about 2 years. I would also start to notice a weird smell coming from the other boys. They really stank. It took me several weeks to notice that they weren't actually the ones who were different. I was. They smelled like people were supposed to smell. My sweat, on the other hand, was sweeter. Not necessarily in a good way, but just weirdly sweet by comparison. Not sugary, but more like the smell of thick dairy. I hadn't thought about it. I just figured that was the way sweat was supposed to smell. It wasn't. I'd made one friend in high school, Darren. Short guy who dropped in and out of social cliques like it was a job. I talked to him about it and asked him to smell me. Weird, I know. And he agreed that something was off. He convinced me to talk to the school nurse, thinking it might be something like diabetes. I was scared he'd tell someone about it, but he never did. Good guy. I had a long chat with the school nurse, Anita. She was very reassuring. Apparently, puberty can have all sorts of weird effects on the human body. A sweet smell coming from your sweat was hardly the worst she'd seen. It was weird, sure, but this was a weird time to be a human. Still, she decided to run a few blood tests just to make sure my iron levels and white blood cells were okay. As soon as she poked the needle through my arm, she recoiled and crinkled her nose. The syringe dropped to the floor and I got up. She got a tissue and started to blow her nose repeatedly, over and over. "What the hell was that?" she exclaimed. "What did you—" I had no idea what she was talking about. I looked at the drop of blood poking out of my arm, and I didn't notice anything odd. I just put a band-aid on it while Anita tried to regain her composure. Come back tomorrow," she coughed. "We'll talk more, okay?" But she was sick the next day. I felt uncomfortable with the whole thing, and I wanted to talk to my mom about it. But I also didn't want her to get worried. When you have someone in your life that's always on the breaking point, you make a habit of stepping carefully. It took Nurse Anita the rest of the school week before she returned to her job. I was immediately summoned to the nurse's office. she'd lost weight. A lot of it. She was drinking water from a large bottle when I got there, and she had dark markings around her eyes. She didn't seem well, but she lit up as she looked at me. Anita asked me for a new blood test, and I agreed. She lined up 4 syringes. Her hands were shaking, but she regained her focus once the needle got closer to my arm. Step by step, she filled the syringe, but she seemed to get more and more excited as she did. I could swear she was sniffing my neck. The whole thing was weird, and I left as soon as she gave me a band-aid. She promised to run some tests and let me know as soon as she was done, but she wanted me to return at least once a week for a checkup. Apparently, sweet-smelling sweat was a bigger deal than I'd anticipated. I asked her if I could see a doctor, but she just shook her head. As I left the nurse's office, I looked back. She was standing in the doorway, staring at me from across the hall. Her eyes never left me. She was staring at my neck, drinking from a water bottle. This time, I told my mother. I had no idea how much she would overreact. Instead of talking to Nurse Anita, she pulled me out of school the same day. She threw our entire lives into boxes, breaking at least half of our dinnerware in the process. In less than a weekend, she'd packed up everything and hired a truck. I barely had the time to hug my grandparents goodbye before we were out of town. I was forced to switch phone numbers, and my mother swore that if I didn't remove my social media accounts, she'd smash every touchscreen we owned. I'd never seen her like that before. I was terrified. That's how we ended up in Sabre, Michigan. Of course, my mom couldn't check on me all day long. I did get time to check in on my social media. Darren, still in disbelief about me leaving so soon, told me things had gotten weird at school. Nurse Anita had started asking questions about where I'd moved, and when the principal couldn't reveal that information, she got aggressive. The police got involved, and it was revealed that she'd taken my blood samples home. Things got unclear at this point, but Darren, whose mom works at the sheriff's office, had spoken over dinner about Nurse Anita apparently drinking blood straight from the syringe. That wasn't all. In the days that followed, she was taken into custody. She was doing some sort of hunger strike and couldn't even keep down water. She actually died from dehydration, right there in the county jail, surrounded by paramedics trying to understand why her body was actively resisting an IV. By now, my mom and I had settled in a 3-small-bedroom apartment. I confronted her about Nurse Anita and what had happened. My mom finally opened up to me. "You know what capsaicin is?" she asked. "It's a thing in spicy food that makes your tongue and throat hurt. It's a kind of self-defense thing that just is supposed to make us stay away." I'd heard about it, and I was aware of the concept. "This thing that is supposed to make us stay away just makes it more enticing," she explained. "People can get addicted to it. To many, it has the opposite of the intended effect. It became something to be desired instead of something that protects the plant. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I sort of was. I didn't want to think I was, but I was. "Our family is different," she told me. "I was hoping this wouldn't happen to you, but it did, and we had to move." She really did try to bring me a normal life. She tried not to worry, but whatever is inside me was growing extremely potent. I started to understand why our family had lived isolated, and why she wanted me to be careful around the others. As a kid, it wasn't as dangerous, but as a teenager, it was stronger than ever. That's why even I was noticing my own smells. They'd gotten stronger. But the years passed. My mum got a job at a gas station, and I helped out as a farmhand and cherry picker. Things were going pretty well, all things considered, until last year. I was picking up my mom from the night shift early in the morning when a truck on the opposite lane ran a red light. We were hit. It wasn't a bad hit, but it was bad enough to send us into a spin and into a nearby ditch. Mom had been looking through her purse and smashed her head against the passenger window, and my head bashed the steering wheel. The passenger side of the rear half of the car was folded like origami. I barely even remember what happened next. I remember the truck driver coming to check on Mom, only to drag her out on the pavement. I remember paramedics in a police car. I remember eyes looking at me, delirious and dark. Open, bloody mouths, tendons snapping, a sweet, flowery smell drowning out the gasoline pouring from the car. Red. I remember seeing a half-eaten face slowly being torn apart. Eyes that used to comfort me have lost their sight. A slack-jawed nightmare, having clothes and limbs torn apart and splayed on the concrete like a flattened toad. I don't remember much about getting away. I was chased through a field of wheat and threw up in a water bucket next to the well. I hid in a barn and covered myself in hay to dampen the smell of my blood. I remember a flashlight passing over me as 3 people left, desperately looking somewhere else. Bloody mouths still chewing. Pupils so large their eyes looked black. They were barely even breathing, their breath so short I couldn't see their chests move. I made it. I would never speak of this in person, as I don't want to risk anyone finding me. I've moved twice since that incident, and I'm starting to understand what I am. The problem is, I've started to get cataracts. I know, it's at an early stage, but it's definitely there, and it's progressing rapidly. I'm going to need surgery. Someone has to operate on me, and I fear I'll never wake up from that surgery. I have no idea what to do. I can't live like this, constantly fearing someone will get too close and catch a whiff of me. No wonder my mum had to leave my dad. No wonder she was always afraid. You're all hunting me. You just don't know it yet. Since I was a child, I've been having the same nightmare. I dream of lying on my side in bed, looking at a tapestry of flowers. Then, a stranger reaches into my room. He pulls aside my covers and pushes a blade to my throat. I look up at him and see a large pair of blue eyes. He smiles as he pushes the knife into my throat. I release you, he whispers in a comforting tone. The same dream every single night. I knew of that dream before I even knew what a knife was. I would wake up screaming, clutching my throat, crying at the top of my lungs. I started having that dream before I could even walk. It's one of my earliest memories. I went to therapy for years. I'd be scared of flower tapestries, or sleeping with my door closed, of sleeping with the lights off, all manner of things that reminded me of the room from my nightmare. I was put on anxiety medication when I was 5 years old, and antidepressants just 1 year later. I was deeply paranoid and had to go through therapy, as well as regular checkups. I had high blood pressure from the age of 10, and various stress-related issues, including violent outbursts and insomnia. I couldn't go to a normal school. As you can imagine, it was an enormous strain on my family. Sometimes they had to tie me down to keep me from jumping out of bed, screaming. I was given sleeping pills, making my sleep completely dreamless. It tired me out to the point where I'd go about my days completely dazed. It made me sleep 14 hours a day, but at least I could function as a human being most afternoons. When I was 13, I was invited as a flower girl to my aunt's wedding. I was flown out to their place in St. Gall, Missouri, where I stayed the night. There was a large party the night before the reception, and I had to turn in early. The entire guest house was completely dark, but after 3 years of heavy medication, I wasn't as anxious about darkness as I used to be. That's why I didn't notice the flower tapestry. That night, one of my aunt's guests stepped out of the party. He was wildly drunk and had seen me earlier that night. He owned the building where I slept and decided to pay me a visit. He had a knife and large blue eyes. As he opened the door to my room, I turned around and saw him, just like in my nightmare. But this time, it ended differently. I could act. I wasn't locked to the actions of my dream self anymore. I'd been prepared for years, so when my attacker entered the room, I burst into action. I threw my bag at him and crawled out the window, which I'd left open. He followed me, screaming the same thing as in my dream. I will release you. He hurried down the creek behind the house and waded out to my knees. He followed me. He'd left his shoes by the entrance so I wouldn't hear his footsteps. As he waded out, he suddenly crouched, screaming. It was so dark out that I couldn't see anything but black water. but I knew he'd stepped on something sharp. He fell forward, reaching towards me. I pounced and grabbed his knife. Long story short, I made sure he would be no threat to me or anyone else ever again. The police stepped in. I was interrogated and released within 12 hours. I was ecstatic. My nightmare after all this time would finally be over. I slept without sleeping pills and didn't have any problems. I was fully rested and relaxed for the first time in my life. Euphoria. In the aftermath, my life slowly got back on what can be considered a normal schedule. Sure, I still had trauma from the assault, but without the stress of a mangled sleep cycle, I could adapt over time. I started doing better in school and even made a few friends. As the months passed, I started to have ordinary dreams, pleasant ones even. I would look forward to sleeping, wondering what magic I might see when I closed my eyes this time. But something has been bugging me for years now. It started as a nagging thought. This man, this attacker, was foreseen. I knew he was coming, but what if there's a second one later in my life? A third, a fourth? I will die someday, and without knowing how it's going to happen, I'm at a loss. I found myself scared of doing the most basic tasks, like crossing the street or cutting vegetables. Death could be anywhere. Back to therapy. Again. For years, I couldn't stop thinking about what was going to happen, when I started noticing things around me that no one else seemed to see. I would see large blue eyes staring at me from across a busy street. I'd hear someone sharpening a knife in the back of a movie theatre. I'd hear those words in any movie, in any TV show, in any conversation. I release you. Those words would hurt me like a cigarette burn in my ears. I would explain it to my therapist as a feeling of being knife-round, like I was supposed to be killed that night, but something got in the way. I was meant to be stabbed to death. I can't shake the feeling to this day that this is my fate. Is there another attacker in my future that I need to prepare for? When? Where? I started to isolate myself. It was easier not to worry about people when there's simply no people around to make me worry. My parents had a vacation house out by the lake that we fixed up for my 19th birthday. They got me a car and helped me with my weekly grocery shopping. I've lived on disability for almost my entire adult life, and if it hadn't been for my parents, I don't know what I'd do. I've lived like this for several years, but recently, things have started to change for the worse. It started when my dad died. He was a small-town dentist, so pretty much everyone knew about him. His passing was big and sudden news, and I'm still not clear as to how it happened. My brother Jacob, who was also a dentist, took it especially hard. A lot of people from both sides of the family had completely forgotten that I existed. At the funeral, I was approached by half a dozen people at least, who just asked about my relationship to the deceased. It was embarrassing, but I was too distraught to make a scene. Still, there were plenty of people there that I'd never seen, but I couldn't be bothered to ask them all who they were. My therapist had talked to me about making thresholds for my paranoia, and that there were limits I must keep myself to. It's one thing to politely ask someone their name, another thing entirely to catalogue the entire wake and comb through the guest list for suspicious motives. Still, I saw several suspicious faces in attendance. Large blue eyes flashing in the distance. Familiar whispers. Tinges of metal against the church pews. Ordinary people leading ordinary lives suddenly turn towards me, their eyes changing colour and size. They stare, and I know what they want. Something inside them stirs, trying to push them towards me, blade first. Now, when I'm at home, I don't feel safe. In the morning, there are footprints in the mud outside. I can hear someone tugging at the doorknob in the night. I see blue eyes passing by the window. There are knives missing from my kitchen, and I wake up to whispers in my ear. I release you. Last week, I went into town to get my own groceries. There were 8 other people at the supermarket, but they all stopped as soon as I entered. All of them just stood there, staring at me. Everyone with the same big blue eyes. They were smiling at me, like he had smiled. Harmless, royalty-free shopping music blared through the aisles. "I'll release you," the cashier said with a smile. "I release you," repeated the old woman by the dairy shelves. I left in a hurry and haven't been back since. I see those same eyes in every passing car, walking down every street, and I sense the knife's edge in every conversation I overhear. At night, I know they're just outside my window, waiting to see me through the curtains. It can't just be paranoia at this point. It has to be my fate. I am knife round. They're coming to release me from this constant worry. When I was about 12 to 14, I used to see this white orb in my room at my parents' house. I would always see it at the start of the floor and shoot up into the ceiling. My mum was on the second floor. Now, I don't believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff, and I've always tried to figure out ways to explain it. I used to think that because my eyes were playing tricks on me, since my room was always dark. That all changed when my cousin from out of town came and was spending the night. As soon as I opened the door to my room to show her, she asked me, "What was that white orb?" After a while, I stopped seeing it. Since then, a lot has happened. I've moved out, then back in, then back out again, and now due to COVID, I had to move back and it's no longer my room. During a summer when I was 14, I used to have an urge to check the kitchen for anything. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't sleep till I stood in the kitchen in the dark and counted in my head till 10 or 20. I have no explanation for it. It just kind of happened. I remember I would sneak downstairs and just stand at the bottom of the stairs in the dark and quiet. Once, my aunt even caught me, and that was a hard thing to explain to her. Sometimes, I wouldn't even realize I'm doing it, and it just seems like a normal thing to me. I remember one time when I was a bit older, about 18, my parents went out of town and it was just me and my brothers home for the weekend. That night, my brothers went out with friends, so it was just me. I was upstairs playing games, and it was about 2 or 3 a.m. when I decided to call it quits for the night. I got thirsty and decided to go downstairs into the kitchen for a cup of water. My basement doorway was inverted, the stairs and the kitchen. As I was walking past, I heard what sounded like a woman's voice singing. It wasn't in English and wasn't Vietnamese. So I thought maybe my brothers left the TV on or their computers on or something. I checked both of their rooms and nothing was on. My game was already off, and I didn't have the courage to go check the basement. About 3 years ago, I was walking with my mum and sister at a small park nearby. It was big, paved walking trail that loops around everything else in the park. It's a pretty popular place to walk your dog or ride your bike too, since it's not complicated or a super long trail. At the halfway point, there's a small opening in the woods where there's a hidden trail that's unpaved. You just follow the beaten path and there are a few places where it forks and you can take a longer walk. I'd only ever taken the shorter version of it with my sister because she's not as adventurous as I can be. So I took the opportunity to walk on the wooded trail by myself, while my sister stayed with my mom. I didn't plan on taking the longer unknown path, so I started off as I always did. After about 5 minutes of not seeing anyone, I heard rustling. It was like someone was running and coming straight at me. I was trying to convince myself that some health nut decided that running on this twisted path was a great idea, instead of it being some crazy axe murderer that was brave enough to attack in the daylight. I sped up, but didn't run. I knew they'd catch up to me in a matter of seconds. Finally, I heard a voice behind me and I turned around. I knew this guy, kind of. I didn't know his name, but he bought soup and toilet paper once a week at the store I worked at. He was probably in his late 70s or older and always seemed nice. I told him I remembered him, and he recognized me too. I could only think, how is this old man running that fast? He told me that he walked in those woods every day for years and wanted to show me something. I was definitely creeped out by this point, but I'm an anxious person and didn't want to be rude, so I agreed to follow him. I must have a death wish. He took me deeper into the woods, and I made sure I held onto my phone in case of emergency. I also snapped a blurry photo of him from just behind, in case someone managed to find my phone and not me. I would lie and say that I don't know why I followed him, but I do know. It's because I'm a people pleaser with anxiety, and I'm also an idiot. We walked to this tree that was split in half, and he told me about how it was struck by lightning on a specific date that he somehow remembered, because he knows when all of the trees that have fallen fell. He wanted to keep showing me more trees and take me deeper into the woods, but I'd had enough. This old guy was in shape, and I wasn't. My anxiety was making my heart pound, and the rugged pathway and humidity weren't helping me settle down. I told him that I needed to go, but maybe some other time, and he followed me out. He stood at the edge of the woods and watched me as I continued on the paved trail and caught up to my mum and sister, and he just waved at me. I somehow stopped seeing him at work for a few months, but then he came back. He didn't remember anything. He couldn't even find the soup. My co-worker said that a few weeks after I told her about seeing him, that he'd ask if I was around. And then his memory just seemed to deteriorate entirely. His wife had to come find him and take him home. I quit my job a few weeks later because I had found something related to my degree, so I don't know if he's still alive and active. And I haven't been in those woods again since, because I don't want to have him find me again. Maybe he was just an innocent old man obsessed with dead trees, but regardless, it was a creepy encounter that I'd like to avoid experiencing again. Logically, I probably would have been able to beat him if he did attack me, and we were within running distance of the trail if I could find my way back on my own. Just don't be stupid like I am and follow an old guy you know nothing about into the woods so he can show you something, and then realize that he's extremely experienced with the woods that you're in. Alone, and this guy showing you dead trees and telling you about the storms that caused them to fall.